Hi, welcome to Infinite Leaders Live, the podcast that shares real life lessons from real life people. We're incredibly fortunate to speak to so many inspirational people from around the world. And as ever, we're delighted that you've chosen to join us to listen, to learn and share. I'm joined as usual by my pal, Alan. How are you doing, Alan?
Yeah, good, thanks, Lewis. And we're proud again to wear our Tsunami products. Tsunami is the #1 choice for eco sportswear. And I'm really excited by today's guest, and she will certainly talk about the things you don't get taught at university or on any courses.
And if you've listened to our shows before, you know that we're keen on hearing your feedback. Please do get in touch with us. You'll find our episodes on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and other podcast platforms, on IGTV, YouTube, and we're also vocal on Twitter. You can find all our work at theinfinitelearners.com. Be better educators, be better humans is what we're all about, and we're ready to get cracking. Let's go.
Yeah, get your pens and papers ready, guys. There's going to be some gems of wisdom coming out of the show today. So, Dr. Laurie Koerner has been in the field of education for over 3 decades, and she spent the first 26 years of her career as an elementary school teacher, having taught every grade. She's a Fulbright specialist scholar and served as an adjunct professor for special education at several universities in New York. Dr. Koerner is currently the Executive Director of Curriculum, Instruction and Professional Personnel in a public school district on Long Island in New York. And her research has been centered on educating the whole child so they get best equipped to meet the maximum academic potential. And Dr. Koerner is a mum of 4 and a bold child advocate, and she's presented across the US regarding innovation in education and has recently written a book called Actually I Can. And that's our starting point, Laurie. Welcome to the show. Tell us about that inspiration for the book.
Well, thank you so much for having me tonight. So the inspiration for the book is basically, it's based on everything I've experienced through my time in life and in education. And I thought it would be fun and hopefully inspiring to other people to write down my thoughts and ideas. And we rise by lifting others. So I felt that if other people could read the book and find their own inspiration and empowerment, what a wonderful world it would be. So
yeah, you've just mentioned there one of your lovely little quotes that you go through in your book, rise by lifting others. I like the one that you've got, create the child for the path, not the path for the child. Do you want to explain a little bit about that one?
Sure, thank you. In American education, we've gone through so many changes. I'm curious to hear about education where you are as well. But in American education, we did go through a time where we were standardizing curriculum and standardizing assessments. And I started to see the most excited, creative children just breaking down a bit and developing anxiety challenges. And I saw the most creative, talented teachers contemplating retirement. And I started to think about what I could do to help make positive change in American education. And so create the child for the path means allow children to find themselves and to find their own passions and talents and create the pathway that will suit them well without predetermining a path for them. So
that's very much down the line of William Gardner's work, isn't it? About trying to find out how children are clever, not how clever the children are. And
exactly.
Very much the creativity line around Sir Ken Robinson's work and everything like that. Tell me how important that sort of creative self-awareness for children is, and why it's something that you've chosen to essentially write a large swathe of your book around.
Well, you hit the nail on the head a little bit with Ken Robinson, may he rest in peace. I was a huge admirer of Sir Ken. I actually had dinner with him one night, and we had the most magnificent conversation about child creativity and curiosity and allowing children to figure out who they are and what their place in the world really is. And so the basis for the book is to inspire educators and parents and anyone who loves children to help them find their way by asking questions in the way that you said before. The question isn't how intelligent are you, it's how are you intelligent, or how are you creative, handy, mathematical. So I agree with you that that we need to shift the questions that we pose to children, and let them know that they're more than a test score, or a standardized test score or an assessment, right? Everybody has their own abilities and their own talents, multiple intelligences. So
can we go a little bit more into that, Laurie? Because I watched that Operation Varsity Blues last week on Netflix, that, you know, about the college scam, the guy who did the side doors and back doors and whatever doors to get into the rich kids into universities.
Yeah.
Now, it just highlighted for me the shockingness of everything being based around scores, and then the way that society is so heavily biased towards the richer students getting into university. But we still need some form of assessment, don't we? Or accountability or scores to get into university. Now, I don't personally agree with all that anyway, but I do see that there has to be a measure. So how can we bring that together and have this holistic approach, but also have a way of getting into university?
Right. I think that's a really great question. And assessment is a valuable part of education, isn't it? We need to assess our students to see where they are in their education. But I think that it's really important that we look at what types of assessments we use with children. So a diagnostic, formative assessments, summative, portfolio, performance-based, project-based. There's so many different ways to determine student acquisition of knowledge and skills. And so looking outside of those standardized, in where we live, their state assessments, we really need to become more creative and allow children to show what they know in the best way that they possibly can, shouldn't we?
Without a doubt, Laurie, but will universities change their outlook? Because that's the problem, isn't it? We can all have these wonderful ideas, and we've spoke to guys who are involved in the Green School Initiative in Bali and New Zealand, and they totally agree in this philosophy, but it's the universities, and if they don't change, it just has that cascading effect back through and nothing changes, does it?
You're absolutely right. We need to look at the profile of our accepted students in the university, right? So some of our universities have begun to change what the profile of a student looks like. So they're moving away from those standardized test scores. In the States, it's SAT, ACT, and they're moving more towards that holistic component, character, communication ability, a cooperation, collaboration, a curiosity, conflict resolution. I call it navigating the seas, right? So that holistic approach to who you are and what you are able to do, your ability and your potential, as opposed to your summative score.
It's interesting at the moment with the GCSE situation in England and through international schools, and there's an assumption that, and this isn't necessarily the view I have, but this is a view that I think from reading around the subject is something that's starting to catch, is that there isn't a trust in teachers to be able to give an honest grade to a student. There's a worry or a concern that seems to be underlying that teachers can't give a grade to students that is fair and that is moderated across the world on the same exam, on the same syllabus. Now, that's been compounded at the moment because we can't sit exams in the way that we normally would because of COVID. So rather than schools maybe being asked for evidence to create grades, there's also exam-based assessments that have been brought in as a way to sort of moderate. So even though there isn't an exam, there still is necessarily some sort of exam that creates a lot of information for students to look at around a subject that can sort of recreate the same kind of assessment as an exam can, even though there's probably arguably a real opportunity here to have a go at grading a student based on the evidence that you've seen as a teacher over the past 2-3 years, however long the course is, without that need for an end of exam assessment. So even with the opportunities that we've got at the moment to take into account project work, portfolio stuff, to take into account formative and summative assessments as we've gone along, we're still not using it. We're still not taking that opportunity in the GCSE system. And we've seen that internationally as well as in the UK as well. What are exam boards? What are universities? What are colleges so scared of? Is it the lack of control? Is it the lack of quality of teaching that they're questioning in different areas? From your point of view, what do you see as the huge barrier that's stopping, like Alan said there, this idealistic world where everybody's assessed in their own sort of way, and therefore everybody's got an opportunity to express themselves in the way that they want?
But you said a few things that I took note of here. First of all, with COVID, things have changed, and I believe that they will continue to change in years to come. And so, yes, it's true. We haven't had the opportunity to assess students in the way that we always have. And I think that's the answer to your question directly. I think universities, and I don't want to speak for anyone. It's just my opinion. I think universities, maybe have this notion that, well, this is the way it's always been done. And so this is the only way we really know how to do it, right? Looking at children across the board and comparing these scores based on these standard assessments, that's been the norm. And so change really pushes us out of our comfort zone, doesn't it? So when we start to make change, it is a trickle effect. And we need to share with public schools or private schools. Well, we're changing our admitted profile of a student. And so now, what are you going to be doing in your system to assist us? So it's this whole connected system of change. But I agree with you that we have a real opportunity in our hands right now to begin to make futuristic change and move it in a direction where we really can create a way to look at the whole child and what they have been able to do over their time in education, including community service, presentations, innovations, real world authentic opportunities, and potentially present those to a university as, hey, this is what I have to offer. This is kind of in the same way that we do on a job interview. This is who I am, this is my profile, and here's what I have to offer to you. So I think this is a really exciting time in education, on the heels of a very unfortunate situation, but I think we need to grab it and run with it.
And you highlighted earlier that importance around soft skills, and it's a phrase that, and I know I don't particularly like. I haven't found one that's used more widely at the moment than that. But you talked about conflict resolution and collaboration and a few other things. How do we begin to measure those and present students' abilities in those without exams and without assessments in a very formal and traditional way?
Great question. And so the term soft skills, I prefer to use essential skills, because I believe that they really are essential to student success, to successful citizens, actually. But how do we measure it? I don't know that I want to necessarily move in that direction where we're measuring communication, collaboration, cooperation. I think it has to be, I don't think there's a standardized way to assess that, and I don't think we should. I think it should be an individualized synopsis or presentation of what each person brings to the table, because everyone has a skill set to bring to the table. And so how do we move society into this process of accepting each other for what we bring, instead of measuring us against each other or next to each other?
Yeah, I've just picked up there, and it's almost like would have a digital portfolio, isn't it, of where you could demonstrate how you've developed these essential skills or citizenship skills or good human being skills. You almost need evidence. Don't see if you've played for your football team, you've got your videos, you're playing football, and what you've learned from that, reflections. That is almost one way. But is it just easy for a university or just to see, right, there's a grade, that's it, and then the other bit takes too long, doesn't it? So it's just is it a time thing? Is it just a functionalist approach over a socially critical approach? Is that what happens?
I think you pose a really important question. And in the States, we do have some organizations that have begun to create these digital portfolios that you mentioned, which actually assist children in logging their sports participation and their community service and video vignettes of what they have presented. So I think you're really onto something there with that. I think that is a much bigger view of a student. And yes, I think maybe it is easier to say, well, what are your grades? Do you meet the mark? Okay, you meet the mark, so we'll let you in. But how many children and how many people have you met that have outstanding grades, but then you put them in real world situations and they have a difficulty problem solving or resolving conflicts with other people or collaborating. Some of the students I've had in my time with the highest grades prefer to work alone. And so that might not work well in the real world. So I really do think that you have a brilliant idea. And I think we need to look at that and begin to promote, to share the change that we're really sitting on right now.
And how many times do you see that the opposite way around as well? You've got children with real world skills and the ability to hold conversations and to make friends and break friendships with empathy and with consideration and with compassion, but maybe their grades wise, they haven't done as well. We interviewed a guy called Jake Humphrey months ago, Alan, didn't we? And Jake Humphrey's a very successful broadcaster, sports broadcaster in the UK. He used to be a children's TV broadcaster previously to that. And he talks about how his exam grades were really poor, but his superpower is empathy. And he feels and he asks the right question to be able to try and bring the emotion out of people. And I suppose that would be an example of what we're talking about here, right?
I love that. I absolutely love that you brought that point up because yes, there are so many students that, maybe they can't make the grade the way that society expects them to, but they have these amazing, wonderful skills that will really bring them far, maybe farther than the valedictorian or the top students. So it's a really great point. And what message are we sending to children if we say to them, well, you didn't make the grade, so those other skills that you have, they really don't count. So I think we have to be very careful of the messages that we're sending to our youngest citizens.
As parents, Laurie, it's so hard, isn't it, as well, because you end up falling into that trap. You start looking at numbers and letters on a sheet of paper on a report rather than focusing on the child. And I'm as guilty as that as anybody. Can I just come back to a point from earlier? And I love this, is we always done things that way. That's the one phrase that I cannot abide by in any organization. We've always done it that way. And Lewis and I, we make a mission to go and have a change whenever we hear that phrase. Can you give us a really good example of when you've heard that and you've gone, you know what, that's rubbish, I'm going to change that?
Well, it's kind of my life story, actually, and I agree with you, Alan. When I hear that, well, this is the way we do it, I tend to immediately go in another direction. So, I think a classic example is when I was a teacher and we had this new system of instruction. It was called Common Core. And it kind of came to town. And my colleague said, well, this is how we have to do it. This is what they're telling us to do. And I saw that the children weren't learning the way that they wanted us to teach. And so I closed the door and I kept teaching students and not the standards that they were kind of pushing at the time. And I'm not saying that standards are a bad thing. Standards are a very good thing when appropriately implemented, right? So I'm with you on that. When they say, well, this is how we do it, I just immediately, the hairs go up. And I say, oh, no, we don't really do it that way. We do it the way that we know works best for children. because children always have to be at the forefront of everything that we do, every decision that we make. So.
Yeah. I mean, we have an expression, Laurie, on our podcast that the context drives the narrative, and every context is totally different. And to be expected to push one agenda or one method or one approach to learning is just so wrong. But once again, it's that functionalist approach that is then forced upon everybody because it's easier.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that we remind each other, that we remind our colleagues that, you know, if a child's not learning the way that we teach, then we have to change the way we teach to meet the way that they learn. So if they're not learning the way that we're teaching, we have to change our way. We can't expect the child to change. We have to meet them where they are. So if they're a visual learner, we have to change the way we teach and use visual cues. And if they're an auditory learner, we have to make sure that we use multi-modalities, right? So I agree with you again. So happy for this chat, actually, because there's so many commonalities here. But yeah, we can't force a standard way of teaching because everyone is so different. Even with my 4 children, each one is so different. And so when we look at that small group there, imagine a large population of children, right? How different their learning profiles are.
Yeah. I know, Laurie, one of the things that you talk about, and it's just touching back on this idea of trying to measure children in a way that's standardized and that's examined and assessed. You use a phrase, overscheduling, of children have often got too much in the schedule and there's no time for play. How important is that balance?
I think it's incredibly important. I think that COVID has proven to us, and because I have sat with children in roundtable discussions, because I think their words are the most important words, and asked them, you know, how do you feel not having been able to play your scheduled sports? And of course, initially it was devastating, right? There was no dance, no baseball, no organized sports, no tag football down at the fields. But as time went on and we were in lockdown and children were forced to learn from home and not do all of those things, I'm told from the children, well, you know, I really had time to get to know myself, and I'm reading for fun again. And I really enjoy taking walks or sitting outside and just not having that. We have in America, we are very rush. We rush everywhere. And, throwing down the fast food and getting to the next appointment, the next game, and the next, and so there are pros and cons, right? We want our children to learn to be a team player and be part of something bigger. But on the other hand, we have to be mindful that that downtime is so important to their social, emotional well-being and growth, that they have that time to self-reflect and figure out what they really want from themselves, right?
Yeah, you're totally right, Laurie. I mean, just from a dad perspective, my kids, I've got twins aged 11 years old. They've really missed organized sport. It's like really affected them because that was almost their identity. They got their identity through sport. How important is that identity then in having well-being and knowing yourself?
I think you make a good point when you say that their sports were their identity, because we see that a lot. And I agree with you, my own children as well. But how important is it to allow them that stop time to find other parts of themselves, other passions, other interests, other talents that widen their view of themselves and their identity?
I agree. The only problem with that has been video games.
That's true. That is very true. And I think, we saw a huge shift to that over focus on video games during that COVID time. And it is important as parents and educators that we help our children to find the balance, and we help them to monitor themselves. And I do it with my own teens. I remind them, we put a timer on and to kind of snap them out of that that world that they go into, that video world.
It's hard though, Laurie, isn't it? Because when they're playing football or any sport, and then it's the session's finished and they come home, they're happy to finish the session. They come home, they have their food. And my own children did it last night. They came in from swimming, they were starving. they had their food, they were happy, really happy. You try and take them off Fortnite after an hour or FIFA or whatever it is, and it's a different reaction.
They're angry.
Yeah, they're angry.
Yeah, they're angry. It's an addiction, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's an addiction, isn't it? And we need to bring that, I think, to their attention. See, look how angry you're getting right now. Do you see how angry? Why? And then we have to. Why do you feel that way? What's happening right now that's making you so angry that I'm asking you to detach from your game? And so you make a really great point. But as parents, I think it's our responsibility to help them with that time management, that self-reflection, and monitor the time. And it's not easy. It sounds a lot easier than it really is, right? In the moment.
Not easy.
I think that's a really interesting one. I think that what's missing there in your Fortnite example is a punctuation point that makes people, like what Laurie referred to earlier, take that stop time and pause and think, right, what am I going to do next? So the punctuation point at the end of your kid swimming is the swim instructor teacher tells them to get out of the pool and get changed. And there's a transition period there. They've gone from performing and being in a class to right now they're not performing, now they're going home and it's something different. When you're scrolling on your phone and you read an article or you watch a video, there's another that pops up. When you're playing Fortnite and you finish a game, even if your mates have gone on, there's another 3 million people in the world that are still on and that want a game. When you're watching Netflix and you finish an episode, we remember back in the day there was terrestrial TV and you finished an episode, you had to wait a week for another one. Like, what a ridiculous concept that is now, right?
They'd never survive. That
doesn't have to happen these days, does it? You just literally click next episode and off you go, and you can sit and watch 12 in a row if you want. And I think that's where that difference is. There just aren't those punctuation points, like Laurie said, to take that stop time and think, right, what's right for me now? What am I going to do now? Where do I go now?
Yeah, I think helping children plan it out. Okay, so you want to play this video game now, but let's talk about what's going to happen. So you'll play the video game, and at this point, we're going to stop, and then we're going to do this other thing, whether it's dinner or shower or go outside and ride your bicycle. And I think helping them work through that planning process will also help them in life, won't it?
Well, yeah, and that links us nicely to your book's sort of area and idea around empowerment of especially women in leadership, but around empowerment as a first sort of topic. Can you tell us why getting children involved in that decision-making process is important and how that can make a difference?
My own children, had always told me, and I, 2 of my children are adults, and then I have 2 teens, and they would always say, "You're always telling me what to do. You're always telling me what to do." And isn't it true? We tell them what to do from the minute they wake up in the morning until the minute they go to bed at night. And so by stepping back and allowing them to make decisions and choices on their own, it is so empowering for them. And it helps to raise their self-esteem, their self-worth, their independence, and to know their own ability, and to feel that confidence that I can make these choices. And sometimes they'll be really good choices and sometimes they won't be. And when they're not, I'll learn from those. And those are powerful moments, You're laughing.
I'm laughing because
I'm afraid.
It reminds me of the film, my kids watched it the other week, called Yes Day. Have you seen that film, Yes Day? Oh, it's literally where you're not allowed to say no. So
Yes.
your kids can do whatever they want. It's like a yes day. And my kids are saying, "Can we have a yes day? Can we?" I'm like, "No."
Exactly.
Maybe shift the paradigm and go, okay, you make those choices, and then have a conversation afterwards and say, well, do you think it was the right choice? Because you're right, we structure the hell out of our kids, and maybe this pandemic has given us a chance, as Lewis has quite rightly said, to stop, have a look, and give them a chance to find themselves rather than be structured all the time. Would you agree?
Yeah, we call it helicopter parenting here.
Yeah, totally.
when the child has the ice cream cone and it starts to drip, we go to wipe it for them, right? So what would be terrible if it dripped? And so we really need to step back and say, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. Allow them that opportunity to be who they want to be, you know?
Yeah. In international schools, Laurie, where we've worked, the helicopter parenting is the standard default model. And it's very interesting to observe. And as a parent, obviously, it is almost you're wanting to provide those and scaffold so the kids don't fail. And
but what lesson are we teaching?
Is failure there? How important is failure in bringing up kids?
How important is failure? It's everything. You know, there's that saying that mistakes are proof that we're trying, right? So if we don't make mistakes, how do we know that we're trying, right? So we need to let our children fail, and it's painful, isn't it? It's painful. Oh, yeah. It's really painful, but we need to realize that these failures and these life lessons are going to make our children more resilient global citizens. If we don't let them fail, then what's going to happen when they do go to college, or they are in their career and they make a mistake? How will they react? They won't have any self-regulation skills to navigate through those types of situations. So.
Yeah, it comes back to the work of Carol Dweck as well. I'm sure you're very familiar on
Absolutely.
On that. You do talk about that a lot in terms of growth mindset. How influential is that in your role as a leader?
Powerful question that you ask. Leadership philosophies vary. My leadership philosophy is supporting other people to help them develop a growth mindset. Not everyone has the same lens, and not everybody has the same philosophy, but I think, teaching people and teaching children the power of yet, right? Well, I can't do that yet. I don't understand that yet. And so shifting that mindset to that growth mindset that you're talking about, that Carol Dweck speaks of in her book, is for me one of the most important things we can do for the people that we serve, and for the students.
That idea isn't new, is it? Let's be honest. I don't know if your mum or your grandma. My grandma used to say to me, Alan, there's no such word as can't. You can't find can't in the dictionary. And I was like, well, that's a contradiction. But okay, there you go. I'll let you have it. But in many respects, obviously that's correct. That isn't the word. But the point being that you don't admit to not being able to do something. You continue and you find a way around it. I read Matthew McConaughey's book over the Christmas break, Green Lights, which I thought was superb. And he talks about, he's such an eloquent guy, and he speaks, he writes so well around a story of his dad telling him how to work a lawnmower. So the story goes, and it's a lot better in the book than I'll ever give it credit for. But essentially, the gist of the story is the lawnmower doesn't work, and he tells his dad that the lawnmower is broken. And his dad says, no, you're just having trouble with the lawnmower. And he goes and he fixes the lawnmower and says, you never can't do anything is the message. There's always a way around it. You just need to be humble enough to ask for help, or to look at it from a different angle. And that's what we're getting at here, isn't it? Is that there's no point just saying I can't do that. It's actually trying to find somebody that can support you, or a way around it to be able to solve the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to teach children to find their strengths, to focus on their strengths, because building off of our strengths will help build our weaknesses, if you will, right? So when we feel like we can't do something, we have to look at what we can do and kind of work that way with that particular problem or situation.
How would that look in a real life context, Laurie? Give us maybe a leadership example, or an example with children that you've come across.
I feel like in a leadership example, it looks like, well, I'll never get that teacher or that faculty member to do A, B, or C. You know, she'll never understand, and I'll never get through it. And so there's this negative language, right? This language of misery, we call it. And so to work with another leader and say, well, you know, what word choice can you use with that teacher or that person to help them become more positive or become inspired? Like, there's a reason behind every behavior, isn't there? So our job as leaders is to find out, to peel back the curtain, find out the reason behind the negativity or the behavior, in the same way that we do with children. So I think that's what it would look like in real life, helping people to navigate through and getting the most out of everyone in our charge, right? So, she'll not, well, what words, how can you speak to her that would inspire her? How can you let her know that you value her? So working with people to use the proper word choice to build the people around them. That's what it looks like for me.
I'm studying leadership at the moment, Laurie, and some of those words that you use as your definition of leadership, if you don't mind, I'll just use some of those. You define leadership as choices, relationships, influence, empowering, encouraging, listening, valuing, inspiring. Would I be right in that they shape your leadership philosophy? And I'm interested in where you got that from, and then how you then brought that together to your own philosophy.
This is such a great conversation. I'm enjoying this so much because it's interesting to hear you say, I guess, did you get that from the book maybe?
Yes.
And it's fun to listen and hear what you have drawn from the book. Yes, 150%. That's how I define leadership. And the reason that I do is through my experiences, my own experiences. I spent 26 years in the classroom as a teacher before I chose to go back to school for administration. And so I learned a lot in that time when I was an unofficial leader without the piece of paper, because you don't need a title to be a leader, right?
We've heard that before, Lois, haven't we? We've heard that.
Yeah, that was at MJ's bombs, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But you learn a lot about how you want to be, and you learn a lot about what you don't want to do, don't you? So I had a lot of time to observe, and I think that has been a huge asset for me as a leader, that time I spent on the front lines there in the classroom.
So Laurie, it's not read from a book. It's not a theory. It's not a model. It's more experiential. Is that right?
Definitely experiential. Yeah.
And then, so you then have developed your own style through years of experience and through study. So it's that combination as well. And then when you come to write that all down and you've got your book, tell us how the title was then inspired. I love that story of your daughter in London.
Which story?
How you got the title of your book.
You know, it's so funny because I was in London with my daughter and we were shopping, and I saw a t-shirt that said, actually, I can. And Kate said, oh, Mom, you should definitely get that shirt because that totally describes, who you are. But that was well before the book was even definitive, signed contract, and it didn't have a title. And so when I was speaking to my publishers, we went through several titles, and I said, well, how about actually I can, because I am. And Daphne said, that's it. That's the one. And so that experience in London the year before was kind of a foreshadowing of what was to come. So it's really magnificent to look back on that and say, wow, that's really amazing that happened. But I titled it that way because I want people to know that we're told so often through our lives, oh, you can't do that, and you'll never be able to do that. And I think it's really important for us to become empowered and to be able to say, actually, I can. and watch.
It comes back to the quote from Gandhi, Laurie, doesn't it? Where your words, thoughts, and actions are all aligned. Would you agree?
Absolutely, 100%. You know, you receive what you give out, don't you? And so your thoughts and your manifestations come back and bring you your highest outcomes there, right? So if you wake up in the morning and you say, "Oh, today's just going to be a terrible day," you know, what generally happens is it turns out that way because your behaviors then follow along. But if you wake up and you say, "I'm so excited because of this activity or this thing that I'm doing today, and it's going to be a great day," then it winds up being that way, doesn't it? Because your behaviors and your actions bring the outcomes. So it's interesting.
I'd like to quote your book at this stage, Laurie. I think this is a really nice time to add this line in. To live a life filled with one's highest choices and brightest outcomes, one should always continue to inspire and empower, and in turn become inspired and empowered. And I think that's what you're talking about there, isn't it? You know, you go and you attack life and you have a positive mindset and you try and do the same for others. What does that look like, Laurie? On those tough days for you, when you do get out of bed and you can't be bothered and it's, you know, New York, it's -8, it's snowing, you know, the cars are honking on the street and you've got a busy day ahead and it's not something that you want to be doing. What practical tips do you have on days like that?
Yeah, and there are days like that, aren't there?
There are.
But I think kind of falling into that negativity is not going to get us anywhere, right? So I always try to remind myself, pardon me, of the bright side and the blessings. If you focus on the blessings, they overpower. I think the positive overpowers the negative. And so, you know, if you get out of bed and you're not really looking forward to what your day has scheduled for you, you know, I think you need to shift your lens to what you will enjoy. And that will definitely bring you to a better place. You know, we have one chance here, don't we? And so we have to make the most of every minute. And I try to live my life that way.
How do you shift that lens, Laurie? Do you have any practical things that you do that help you to achieve that?
I do. You know, sometimes I'll call, you know, one of my children on the way to work, call my mom, listen to music. I think about the victories and the accomplishments, focus on what's going to happen at the end of the day, you know, dinner with the family, my husband. So those are my practices to try to just kind of jump over the negative or things that we might not, you know, want to be doing and focus on the positive. And, you know, what do you do to raise your spirits? Because I think it looks different for everyone. So what do you do when you know, are having a bad day to overcome?
Yeah, it is very contextualized, isn't it? Like I said, there's no one way, there's no one pathway for everybody.
What do you do, Alan? What do you do on them bad days?
It's an interesting one, because it depends also on what sort of thing that's triggered it as well. So it could be something where the kids have done, and then I just need to get out of the house and go for a walk or go on my bike before I lose my temper. Or if it's a work thing, I'll then write the classic one that we learned from our ex-boss was to write that draft email that you never send. I love that one. I absolutely love that
Don't
one.
press send. Don't press send.
Very, very different to what's caused your angst. I think that's an interesting one. You can't have the same response compared to the situation. What about you, Lewis?
Interested. I think going for a walk is one for me. You just go and cool down and get your body moving. I think I always think more clearly when I'm in movement. I don't know if there's a scientific reason behind that. I'm not sure. It's not something I've looked in specifically, but walking is always good. And then, yeah, just talking things through with people and trying to find some honest sounding board, you know, not necessarily somebody that just wants to agree with you. sometimes somebody that's completely out of context, that doesn't understand the situation you're talking about or the problems you're talking about. Sometimes people that are very aware of the context and are very aware of the situations and the problems that you're talking about. And I think a mixture of those. But for me, just reaching out, the more that I'm learning as I'm going, the more I'm realizing that the more you need other people and you need their support and you need their opinions.
And I love what you said, and I agree. Exercise, and you were saying it earlier, Alan. Getting up early in the morning, right? Going for that walk. I drive down to the water, and I missed that before. So thanks for reminding me, Lewis. I take a drive to the water. That's my peaceful place, and just kind of decompress and think and reach out to your support system, someone you can speak to without judgment. So all of these strategies are really important for people to hear. And even just listening to each other, we're reminding each other. And this is such a global connection, right? But it doesn't matter where you are. I think, we have so much that we can, share with each other and that we have in common. And I find it so fascinating, actually.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And it's so many common themes across our 40 odd podcasts. And one of the themes I want to touch upon is a bit more of the struggles, Laurie. And a lot of our women speakers, including my wife, who's a leader in education, have suffered with something called imposter syndrome. And I'm sure you're very aware of imposter syndrome. Is that something that you've experienced? And would you like to share how you've dealt with that, particularly with our women listeners?
Yes. So with, it's interesting because somebody asked me recently, wow, Laurie, you've done all these things and how does it feel? And I always say, it just kind of feels normal. I don't really, each accomplishment is kind of just, okay, well, I did that for me. I didn't really do it for the hoopla or the parade. So it's interesting, isn't it? The imposter syndrome. We call it also, Peter Pan syndrome, that you're going to wake up one day and it's all just been kind of a dream. So I'm not really sure how your wife explained that, but that's my lens on it.
It's that feeling, Laurie, and I suffer from it, and many of our leaders suffer from it. Is what am I doing here? Am I really good enough to be here? Right. Just having that self-doubt of, is this me? I've come from a tough place in the north of England. I'm not really meant to be doing what I'm doing. I should not be working. I should be sat in my government provided house, and I shouldn't really be out in Saudi Arabia teaching and helping lead schools. It's that feeling, Laurie. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, but I think I've worked so diligently to not fall into that mindset because it's predominantly why I wrote the book, right? I think it's really important that we value who we are and the work that we've done and where we are on our journey. And I think it's really important for women to know that you do belong. You are exactly where you belong. And for women, I say, because we live in a predominantly male society, especially in high leadership positions. And so we need to know that we deserve that seat at the table. We have something to bring to the conversation, something very meaningful, as do our male colleagues. So I look at this, this society, this global society, and I'm very focused on equitable opportunities for all of us together. And so the imposter syndrome for me is something that I try to work with other women on not falling into that and changing the narrative to I do belong. I am, and I can, and I will, and so.
Yeah, that's great. That empowerment there, that comes back to some of your key points in leadership, isn't it? Is that you seem to have nailed it. It's then how do you pass on your knowledge then to other people to inspire them? And just give us an example of some of the things you do with the women that you work with, and practical tips to help people who do suffer with that bit of anxiety about where they're at the moment.
Yeah, I would say nailed it might be a strong.
I don't think you ever nail it. It's an ongoing process, isn't it?
It's an ongoing process. It absolutely is a very focused, mindful process. And I think the things that I do with my colleagues and my friends, they're small. I think the smallest shifts make the biggest difference. So, when you see someone and you say something kind to them, right? A kind word can change someone's day. So when you model those behaviors, I think the people around you start to pick up on those behaviors. And so I believe in leading by pure example. And that is how I choose to live my life. And I am hopeful. I should say I am confident, because that's a more powerful word, right? That other people see the way that I speak to others, and hopefully they pick up on that. And so then it becomes this assembly line, right? So I model, then somebody else picks up on it, then they wind up modeling, and it becomes this way of being. Yeah.
I was reading an article the other day by a doctor in the States, Kirsten Neff. She's based in Texas. She does a lot of work around self-compassion. And she talked about parent modeling being the one thing that will allow children to develop a feeling of self-compassion a little bit more. If they see their parents being kind to them and to being kind to themselves, then that'll have a knock-on effect, which really rings true to what you're saying there. Why is it that in the 21st century we're still talking about equality with women in leadership? Why is that still a thing? Why is this still something we're talking about?
That is the question of the century, I think. I don't know the answer to that question. I feel like, again, it goes back to, this is the way it has been. Some of the research that I've done, states that when people are asked to choose a leader, 80% of the time they choose a male, right? And some more research that's in my book says that, at the rate of change where we are right now with women moving into leadership positions, it will take until 2085 for us to reach parity. So, we have the schooling, we have the education, but I think it's societal norms.
Yeah,
that's yeah.
And it will happen, wasn't it, Laurie? It will happen because the talent is there and the intellectual capabilities there. It's just taking time to change those norms.
I hope so. And I do believe that we are making progress. If you look at the COVID pandemic, the leading countries, the countries who fared best were led by female leaders. And that information's in the book as well. So, and I don't want to say, I don't want to say that female leaders are better. Leaders are leaders, and we're all different, and we all have a skill set to bring to the table. I think we need to look at, instead of women versus men, I think we need to just come together as one. In the, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So, but you said something before, Lewis. You said about self-compassion. I think it's really important that we do send the message, especially to young children, that being selfless isn't selfish, and self-care should be at the forefront, especially for us as leaders, right? If we don't take care of ourselves, then we can't serve others to the best of our ability, right? And an empty pot, right?
Yeah, no, good point. And we're just going to wind it down now, Laurie, but it's going to link nicely in to what you just talked about in terms of when people choose leaders, they tend to go towards a man. So I'm going to ask you now, who would you go out for a meal with? Your 3 leaders in history, they could be dead or alive. Who would you choose to go and have that meal with?
I knew you were going to ask me this question. I said,
We love this
I hope
question.
you don't ask me that question. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. You know, I was actually thinking of this earlier today. I said, well, yeah, if they do ask, what would I say? And there's so many ways you can answer this question. I had dinner with Sir Ken, and that was a wonderful experience. Talk about imposter syndrome. But if I could go out to dinner, I think I would really like to meet with some of the educational psychologists, right? Or educational theorists like, you know, Dewey or Piaget, or maybe even Albert Einstein, and kind of just talk to them, and Vygotsky and Bandura, and just sit with them and ask them about, you know, their philosophies and their theories, and ask for advice on how we can continue to carry that through. Because sometimes I feel like maybe we sometimes lose sight of child development and what's proper, and how things should be done in the best interest of children. And I don't think it's done intentionally, but I would love to have dinner with some of those people, Maria Montessori, and just speak about proper child development, and how I could, you know, carry that torch maybe, you know, through the next decade.
That'd make a brilliant podcast, Alan, wouldn't it?
It would make unbelievable podcast. Lewis, we've got our finishing questions.
Okay, so our podcast is called Infinite Leaders Live. Our whole sort of theory is around infinite learning. What does that phrase mean to you, Laurie, as an education, as somebody in education, as an educator yourself, and as a leader? What does infinite learning mean to you?
That's a great question. I feel like when we stop learning and we stop growing, what's left but to wither and die, right?
That's an Einstein quote, that one, isn't
it? Yes. But how true and how powerful, because, you know, we'll never know everything, and we need to be open to always learning from each other, from the children, and so that's what infinite learning means to me. And I quite loved the title of your podcast, and I was so intrigued when you reached out. And I do want to thank you so much again for this incredible opportunity, this global connection. I feel like we will definitely stay in touch and continue to learn with and from each other. So thank you so much for that.
Very welcome, Laurie, and we'd love that. Can you tell our listeners where they can find out a little bit more about you, where they can order the book from, any little bits and bobs that would help our listeners just to read and research a bit more? Surely, that would be wonderful. Thank you. You can find me at Laurie Koerner, LORIKOERNER.edu.com. That's my personal website, and the publishers have the book available on there through Amazon.com. So you can go to Amazon.com if you want to purchase the book as well. And all of my other information, social media, etc., it's all on the website. So it's a one-stop shopping for connections. And the book, actually, I Can, is out now, right? You can order that through Amazon and all decent bookshops. There it is. Right here. Yes, you can buy that. You can buy that on Amazon.com. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity. I'm so grateful to Codebreaker, my publishers, for believing that I can. And I hope that other people take away from the book some inspiration and empowerment. And I hope they do reach out to me to share, because I love to hear it. It's inspiring, and who doesn't want to be inspired? So. For sure. Laurie, thank you. Guys, search Infinite Leaders Live on YouTube and IGTV. We're also on all popular podcast platforms. Please do review, subscribe, leave us some feedback. We love to hear how we're getting on and what you've enjoyed around our guests and the topics that we've discussed. So please do that if you get the opportunity. And you can find everything that you need from us at theinfinitelearners.com. We'll see you next time. And thanks again, Laurie. Really great to chat. Thank you so much. What a pleasure.